50 Cent is hinting that what we already saw was only the surface, and what he's now talking about might completely change how people view everything connected to Diddy. After his Netflix documentary aired, 50 casually revealed that some of the most disturbing claims never made it on screen. Not because they weren't important, but because there was too much to fit. And now, instead of waiting for another season, he's floating the idea of releasing that unreleased footage somewhere no one can censor it: YouTube. Since then, more people have reportedly started reaching out to him with new information, old stories, and things they say were deliberately buried for years. And according to insiders, the real reason 50 is pushing this so hard isn't clout, money, or attention. It's personal. Before we break down what was allegedly left out, why certain names were avoided, and why this next wave could be far more explosive, make sure you hit subscribe. We're pushing to 500 subscribers, and every sub helps keep these deep dives coming without filters. Because once you hear what didn't make the documentary, it's hard to look at any of this the same way again. Here's where things start getting uncomfortable. According to 50 Cent, the Netflix documentary didn't leave things out because they weren't strong enough. It left them out because there was simply too much to include. He's claimed that entire storylines were cut, not saved for later, but pushed aside altogether due to time limits. And one of the claims he hinted at immediately sent shockwaves online. 50 suggested that one of the removed segments involved allegations surrounding a secret child tied to a woman who was once romantically connected to Tupac Shakur. To be clear, these are claims and rumors, not confirmed facts. But the reason they grabbed attention is because 50 says his team had the material ready. It just never made the final cut. Instead of holding it for a second season, 50 has openly floated the idea of releasing that unreleased footage independently, where platform rules and industry pressure wouldn't apply the same way. What makes this more unsettling is what happened after the documentary aired. According to 50, people who had stayed silent for years suddenly started reaching out. Some with stories, some with alleged proof, others just asking why he's really doing this now. And that's when 50 hinted that the motivation behind this documentary run goes way deeper than entertainment. Because if this was just about ratings, he wouldn't be talking about dropping raw footage online. And if this was just business, he wouldn't be poking at stories that were intentionally avoided. But the biggest question isn't what was cut, it's why this feels personal. And that's where the next part changes everything. This is the part most people are getting wrong. From the outside, it's easy to dismiss 50 Cent's moves as another chapter in a long-running feud. Social media has been quick to label it petty, calculated, or attention-driven. But according to people who know both sides, that explanation doesn't even come close. Comedian TK Kirkland stepped in to offer context that reframed everything. He explained that this wasn't about insults traded in interviews or shots taken on records. It was about respect. According to TK, out of all the women in the world, Diddy allegedly chose to get involved with the mother of 50's child. And in his view, that crosses a line that can't be undone. Not accidentally, not casually. TK emphasized that when someone has unlimited access, money, and influence, choices like that don't happen by coincidence, especially not when there's already years of tension between two men. He framed it as a deliberate move, one meant to provoke or dominate or send a message. Again, these are opinions and interpretations, not confirmed facts, but they matter because they explain why 50's response feels calculated instead of impulsive. What hit hardest was TK pointing out that this wasn't a situation where boundaries were unclear. According to him, everyone involved knew the history, and when that history is ignored, it changes how the reaction should be understood. Suddenly, this doesn't look like clout chasing, it looks like retaliation. And if this really was intentional, it raises a much bigger question. Because when you start looking back, people see this wasn't an isolated situation at all. And once you see the pattern they're pointing to, it's hard to unsee it. This is where the story stops being about one situation. After TK Kirkland's comments went viral, a lot of people started connecting dots that had been ignored for years. According to long-standing rumors and insider talk, the situation involving 50 wasn't unique. It fit into a much larger pattern that some say stretches back decades. Multiple figures have claimed that Diddy had a habit of getting involved with women who were previously connected to rivals or people he had tension with. Again, these are allegations and interpretations, not proven facts, but the consistency of the claims is what caught people's attention. Tupac's name in particular keeps resurfacing in these discussions. From former partners to personal overlaps, people online have speculated that this was less about romance and more about power. Some insiders believe these moves were about dominance rather than desire, a way to assert control in spaces where ego and reputation matter. Others say it reflects insecurity tied to unresolved rivalry. Either way, the claim is that these decisions weren't random, they were strategic. And if that's true, it reframes a lot of past stories that once seemed disconnected. What makes this more unsettling is how normalized it allegedly became. According to people close to the industry, these situations were whispered about, not confronted. Everyone knew, but no one challenged it openly. And that silence may be exactly why 50 feels comfortable speaking now. Because once you start pulling on that thread, it doesn't just expose behavior, it exposes how much was tolerated. And that brings us to a new problem, because now even the documentary itself is being questioned. Now the spotlight is shifting, not onto Diddy, but onto the documentary itself. While 50 Cent's project has been praised publicly, not everyone behind the scenes sees it as a clean win. Gene Deal, who has long been connected to the bad boy era, came forward with serious complaints that raised new doubts about how the documentary was put together. According to Gene, several key ideas and story angles used in the series were ones he had already laid out to producers long before the cameras rolled. He claims he walked them through how the documentary should be structured, what moments mattered most, and which stories needed to be told. And yet, when the final product dropped, he says his name was nowhere to be found. Gene also pushed back hard on the idea that time constraints forced certain stories to be cut. In his view, a documentary can always be expanded if the material is important enough. Longer episodes, additional installments, those options existed. So when certain names and situations were left out, he questioned whether it was really about time or about avoiding topics that could trigger serious fallout. What made his criticism more unsettling was the implication that this wasn't the first time something like this happened. Gene referenced past projects where he believes his ideas were taken, reshaped, and credited elsewhere. To him, this documentary followed the same playbook. And if he's right, that raises a dangerous question. Because if the film was already holding back, what happens if 50 releases footage with no producers, no network, and no guardrails? That's when the conversation shifts from storytelling to control. This is where things turn serious. Gene Deal didn't just criticize the documentary, he made a bold claim that stopped a lot of people in their tracks. According to him, if Diddy truly still had the influence people assume he does, this documentary would have never seen the light of day. Gene argued that powerful figures don't sit back when something genuinely damaging is about to air. They shut it down early. Legal threats, cease and desist letters, quiet phone calls, all of that usually happens long before a project is released. But in this case, the documentary not only aired, it's still circulating. From Gene's perspective, that silence speaks volumes. He believes it suggests a major shift in who actually holds power behind the scenes. And if that power is weaker than before, it explains why 50 feels increasingly comfortable teasing more footage, especially footage that was allegedly too risky for a platform like Netflix. What really changes the stakes is the idea of YouTube. Unlike a major streaming service, there's no executive board to negotiate with, no contracts to freeze, no single entity that can pull the plug overnight. If 50 chooses to upload something directly, the rules are different, and the consequences become harder to contain. And that's why Gene believes if more content drops, there may be no stopping it. Not legally, not quietly, not the way things used to work. But even with all that, there's one absence in the documentary that disturbed viewers more than anything else. This omission didn't go unnoticed, and for many viewers, it was the loudest moment in the entire documentary. Despite being one of the most important figures in Diddy's life, Kim Porter's story was barely addressed. She wasn't just a longtime partner, she was the mother of his children, and someone who, according to people close to the situation, saw everything behind the curtain for years. Kim passed away suddenly in 2018 at just 47 years old. The official cause was pneumonia, but almost immediately speculation flooded online spaces questioning whether there was more to the story. To be clear, these are rumors and unverified claims, not established facts. Still, what unsettled people wasn't speculation alone, it was how carefully her story was avoided. Multiple insiders have claims that Kim allegedly had information that could have changed everything. Some say she was working on a book. Others claim she had shared pieces of her story privately with people she trusted. None of that made it into the documentary. Instead, she was briefly mentioned, shown in a few photos, and then quietly moved past. For someone so central to Diddy's personal life, that silence felt intentional. According to Gene Deal, it wasn't because her story lacked relevance, it was because it may have been too sensitive, too complex, and too risky to touch, especially if it opened doors the documentary wasn't prepared to walk through. And the more people thought about it, the more disturbing it became. Because if Kim really knew as much as some claim, then leaving her out changes the entire narrative. And once former insiders started sharing what they personally witnessed, the picture got even darker. Now, the conversation turns to first-hand accounts that left people shocked. Several insiders have shared stories that paint a troubling picture of Diddy's behavior behind closed doors. Mark Curry, for instance, revealed incidents that show a level of control and aggression many fans might never have imagined. One story involved Diddy allegedly monitoring private conversations and confronting a producer with a chair after overhearing something he didn't like. Another claim involves physical violence toward Kim Porter. According to sources, what was presented as accidental in the media, a slipped fall, may have actually involved direct harm. Again, these are allegations and have not been independently verified, but their circulation online and through insider commentary has added a layer of shock to the narrative. These claims don't just question Diddy's personal behavior, they also raise concerns about the environment around his children. Jaguar Wright and others have suggested that multiple adults stayed silent while his kids were allegedly exposed to inappropriate situations. This has left fans and insiders debating the responsibility and choices of those in his inner circle. The key takeaway? Even for someone as powerful and celebrated as Diddy, there are shadows behind the public persona, stories that the documentary barely touches, and rumors that continue to swirl. And while the documentary avoided much of this, insiders say the footage that didn't make it is far more explosive. This is where Diddy's public persona and private life start to clash. For decades, Diddy's legendary parties were known as hotspots for celebrities, athletes, and powerful figures. Yet the documentary barely scratched the surface. Photos were sparse, big names were missing, and the storytelling avoided the chaos and influence those events truly held. Fans couldn't help but notice the gap. Insiders have suggested that the omission wasn't accidental. By downplaying the parties, the documentary avoids questions about who attended, what happened behind the scenes, and the alleged behavior that took place. Observers argue that the parties were more than just fun. They were an extension of control, power, and reputation building. Additionally, many of Diddy's closest celebrity friends have stayed largely silent since the allegations surfaced. Figures like Jay-Z, Mary J. Blige, and Usher, who were all associated with him over the years, have been accused by some of complicity through inaction. Again, these are claims circulating in commentary and online discussions, not confirmed legal judgments, but they feed the perception that the real story goes far beyond the music industry. And as if that wasn't enough, insiders say what shaped Diddy in the first place might be far older than anyone realized. Because to truly understand him, some claim you have to look inside the house he grew up in. The focus now shifts to Diddy's upbringing, and it may explain a lot. Jaguar Wright and other insiders have suggested that Diddy's early life played a critical role in shaping who he became. According to their accounts, his home environment was chaotic, with strangers constantly coming and going while his mother focused on her own life. The type of people who frequented the house, hustlers, basketball players, and others connected to the streets, allegedly exposed him to a world of power, danger, and adult dynamics far earlier than most kids experience. Jaguar argues that this environment instilled ideas about what respect, power, and influence looked like long before the music industry ever entered the picture. Films like Superfly and The Mac, commonly played in his home, may have reinforced certain perceptions of dominance and authority. Even the absence of consistent parental boundaries might have normalized behavior that others would question later in life. She also points to Diddy's relationship with his father and mother as formative. Learning that his father had a hustler reputation, combined with the complicated dynamic with his mother, reportedly gave him a sense of pride in street credibility, a mindset that carried into his public persona. The culture of his upbringing, some insiders say, directly influenced how he later navigated fame, business, and personal relationships. But there's one element that's perhaps even more controversial: the way Diddy allegedly treated his own children. Here's where things get even more unsettling. Insiders claim that Diddy's children were allegedly exposed to situations no child should ever witness. Jaguar Wright and others have suggested that adults in his circle allowed behavior that was inappropriate around minors, raising questions about his parenting style. From partying in their presence to being around adult dynamics that should have been off-limits, sources imply that the environment may have been harmful and confusing for the children. Additional anecdotes from insiders, including Roger Bonds, highlight concerns about the mix of adults and activities in Diddy's household. These stories, while unverified, suggest a pattern of exposure to adult themes far earlier than typical. Fans watching the documentary might have noticed that the portrayal of his personal life with his children is almost non-existent, leaving a gap between what the public sees and what insiders claim actually occurred. The bigger question raised by these accounts is simple. If these stories are true, how could so many adults remain silent? And what does that say about accountability in Diddy's inner circle? With all these stories about childhood, upbringing, and alleged misconduct, the narrative starts circling back to the core: Diddy's personal relationships, both past and present. So where does all of this leave us? From allegations that didn't make it into the first documentary to insiders exposing shocking behavior, Diddy's story is far from fully told. The omissions, whether Kim Porter's quieted voice, explosive party details, or accounts of his children's exposure to adult situations, suggest there's a second layer waiting to be revealed. 50 Cent has teased that more footage could drop, potentially on YouTube, which means fans might soon see a side of the story that Netflix didn't air. This isn't just about old controversies resurfacing, it's about power, influence, and the gaps between public perception and alleged private realities. Whether the next wave of content changes the narrative entirely or simply adds more speculation, one thing is clear: the conversation around Diddy isn't over, and the fallout could reshape how we view some of hip-hop's biggest names. If you want to make sure you don't miss any of these updates, subscribe now and help me hit 500 subscribers. This channel will be your first stop for every shocking detail as it unfolds.